Good evening, preppers. I hope everyone's been having a wonderful weekend. This is Ultimate S&S. So, if you haven't been paying attention to what's happening in the stores and things, we're going to post this up here for you right now on our show. So, you need to make sure that you're getting your food back, that you're prepping food, you're getting as much food as you can, stockpile that stuff any way that you can, and make sure that it's secure. You want to keep it in a fairly cool, dry area. You do not really want to get above 68 degrees Fahrenheit on your storage areas, guys. So, try to keep that in closets or under the beds or something. Keep it dry. Don't put it in a damp basement where it's going to get corroded and all this other mess. But the World Food Program is telling us that we need to be focusing and being aware of the food shortage that's happening around the world. It's not just in the United States. It's not just because of what's happening with this Ukraine-Russia stuff. Now, there's a few other articles that are coming out that says that all this is because of the pandemic and things like that. Understand that is not the case. It is not just supply issues because of, the worker shortages and things like that was taking place. What's actually happening is we're producing less food around the world, and it's going to put us in a very dire situation if things do not change, and it doesn't look like things are going to be changing anytime soon. So they're telling you to make sure that you plant gardens. Now, for those who are trying to figure out, well, where do we get this kind of information? You go to the UN's website, the World Food Program's website, and you can find this information on there, readily available for the public. So definitely make sure you look in there, and definitely make sure you research it before you comment in on the channel. That's one of the things that gets me is we'll talk about, a value shop prep. Like you could go to Walmart and you can buy, these beans and things like that, and you can get 8 pounds of beans for $5. You can get the 10-pound bags for around $7 or $8 too, if you can find them. They're getting harder to find. But and then you'll always have those comments that come in and start talking about the dietary requirements and stuff like that. But understand this is a staple that you can, prep back. Doesn't cost a lot of money. There are a lot of people that are prepping on a budget, and people that don't feel like they can afford to prep either. So you need to make sure that you can physically, financially and responsibly set back preps, but you don't want to put it in a situation where you're going without today, because you want to make sure that you're continuing to keep your health up, keep your food up today, and also be able to put a little bit back. So those are some great ways to do that. Now, if you're just kind of getting into prepping and stuff like that, you're going to realize now that it's hard to prep with the prices of what's going on. Where you used to have a can that would cost 57 cents, it's now costing you over a dollar, $1.47 in a lot of areas. Went to a couple different stores today. We have what they call a grocery outlet, which is usually just 10% above cost. But what's ended up happening is we're seeing that those prices are even higher than Walmart's prices, and that's pretty crazy. But whenever you're looking at what's happening at Walmart and you're seeing the canned foods and stuff like that, you may go, okay, well, this price hasn't changed much. But when you look at what's actually in that can and the size of that can, it's quite a bit smaller than what was available, just a few months ago or even a few weeks ago. So some different things you need to look at. Now, if you're coffee drinkers and stuff like that, you need to be looking at some different types of scenarios to, get your coffee beans or your instant or whatever it is that you prefer to drink, because those types of things are going to be high commodity items, because everyone that drinks coffee, whether they realize it or not, you're kind of a caffeine addict, especially if you drink a lot of soda pops and stuff. And let me tell you firsthand experience, if you just suddenly decide, I'm going to cut my sodas out or cut my caffeine out, you're going to deal with some headaches for a couple of weeks. And it's not just going to be some light headaches, you're almost migraine levels with stuff like that. So make sure when you're prepping that you're keeping in mind what it is that you're really going to use and what it is that you will actually eat, because you see a lot of people that get stuff that ends up just going bad on the shelves in their house, and that's not really being responsible. As they call it hoarding. I wouldn't call it hoarding. I just call it being wasteful. But check your prep dates and stuff. Understand that those sell by dates on the cans, those are not expiration dates. Those are sell by dates. They have to sell that stock by that date. But it will actually keep past by years, not just a few weeks, not just a few days, but years and years to come. If it's been canned properly, make sure you're not getting those dented cans and things like that when you're prepping, guys. When it comes down to what type of food is the best food to buy, well, that's going to depend on your situation. So around here, we kind of rotate what we prep in. So we want to make sure that you have a good, healthy supply of meats and things. So we did a lot of canned meats and stuff last year, back when it wasn't too expensive to buy a lot of that stuff. And then you can look into dehydrating meats and stuff, doing your long-term storage for stuff like that as well. But honestly, when it comes down to it, the cans is really the way to go, because it's going to keep a lot longer. But then we got into our vegetables and fruits and stuff like that, really prepping in on that, trying to make sure we have a good healthy supply. And fruits is a very good staple to have if you don't have fruit trees and things like that around. I think it's important that you realize you can grow a lot of that stuff yourself. You can grow it right there in your house. You don't have to go plant it in the yard. You can grow it in your house. Now, granted, your plants are not going to be as large, and you're going to have to amend with fertilizers and stuff throughout its growth cycle, and you're going to have to provide the adequate lighting that's required there as well. So they have really good LED options and stuff. I've used them myself. They work out really well. Traveling around in the RV, we used to keep a tomato plant going in the shower. You just move it out when you need to shower, move it in there. It has a skylight, but we also put an LED light in there, and that would keep that plant blooming and keep those tomatoes coming year round. Now, obviously, they're not going to be as large as if you grew them in a yard or a big 5 or 10 gallon container, but in a gallon pot, you can still get your tomatoes and stuff like that as well. So imagine what you could actually do in a room, an 8x10 room or something like that, a shed or something, to keep it out of the frost. And even though it's going to get cold, it's going to slow down those growth cycles a little bit, as long as you're adding the adequate lighting. And you can always put those heat lamps in there as well, like they use for chickens and stuff. And that's going to be a little bit cheaper than trying to build a real expensive greenhouse. What I would actually recommend doing, you need to understand, is if you're providing the proper lighting and you're keeping it protected from frost, really your main concern is keeping that root ball around 60 to 65 degrees temperature to keep that plant growing healthy. And the easiest way to do that is buying those little reptile warmer mats, and you can set that thing underneath your potting base, and you can make sure that you have one of them trays to catch water so you're not wetting your mat if you overwater. And those are going to be some really great avenues for you as well to be able to keep that root ball nice and warm so that thing continues to produce. Some really good ideas for you. I hope you give it a try anyway. Now, as you're going to notice when you go to store, those prices are starting to come up because people are starting to use those things for other purposes, and keeping frogs or lizards and different types of snakes and stuff like that. That would typically be required for that. So you're seeing a lot of those cost changes. You're seeing a lot of inflation happening as well across the country, guys, and that's really affecting our food. And that's one of the things that the World Food Program is warning us about too. Is they're telling us that the current rate of inflation changes that's happening every time the Federal Reserve goes up on those interest rates. You see the inflation climb just behind it. Now, the reason that they give for going up on interest rates to bring the inflation down. But that's not what we're seeing. We're seeing it actually have the opposite effect, which is actually what all the analysts were saying it was going to do to begin with. But you can't tell anybody anything that is, not really qualified for the job. And we're seeing that around the nation. But again, guys, I hope that you're getting your food. I hope that you're prepping. As preppers, you're going to run across a lot of stereotypes when it comes to the way people view us. A lot of people view us as food hoarders. We're not food hoarders. We are preparedness type minded people. Just as back in the day, before and even after the Great Depression, people were doing their own gardens. They were canning their foods. They were getting what they could set back. And those are really good ideas to do. And if you've ever heard of those heritage gardens, victory gardens, they've got a lot of different things that they call patriot gardens. They name it different things. A lot of that stuff started right around the Depression time. People were starting to keep those gardens going so that they would always have a food source on hand so they could actually grow some stuff themselves and not go hungry. And understand, when you're looking at daily a 1,200 calorie diet, a 2,000 calorie diet. You're going to hear so many different numbers out there from so many different people. What you need to do is you need to figure out how much work it is you're going to physically be doing, and then how much you're going to be expending on those calories as well. And you get little monitors and stuff. Now, I'm not talking about the new Apple whatever that costs thousands of dollars. They have the older stuff that you can keep up with how many calories you're burning based off how active you are, and keep track of that. You want to make sure that you're putting in more than what you're using, but you also want to be eating 4,000 or 5,000 calories. So, but when it comes right down to it, you may end up having to ration, and that's what I expect to happen, is people having to ration their foods. That's why I say a great staple to have is beans, and all types of beans, not any particular type. I do a lot of pintos, do a lot of limas, kidneys, you name it. We keep it out here. Red beans, the black beans, and different stuff like that. As far as what brand to get, man, get what you can afford. I'm not a brand snob. I buy a lot of great value brands, mainly because of the pricing. But sometimes those name brands are a little bit cheaper as well. So that's something you need to kind of keep an eye on. Make sure you're bargain shopping when you do this type of preps, guys. But I hope you've enjoyed the little content here we've got for you. You know, you've seen what we had going on with the garden. We got our winter squashes coming in pretty nice. It's getting cooler here in the evenings and stuff. And what you're going to notice is if you're growing straight neck squash, the growth on it, it's not going to stunt, but what it's going to do is it's really going to slow down because that is a summer squash and it really grows best in warmer temperatures. But as long as you're protecting it from the frost, that fruit, when you do pick it off of it, it's going to be very sweet. It's going to have a really nice flavor to it. A lot of people like butternut squash. This is even better than that. It's better than those early spring squashes you get off the plant. It really settles those sugars in. And you're going to notice as it gets cooler, your winter squash, which is typically, you know, the kind of round softball shape like you've seen in the video, guys. You're going to notice that stuff's going to have a really sweet flavor to it. It's going to have kind of a sweet squash to almost a sweet pumpkin flavor to that. And if you pick them young, and now the ones you see in the video, they're way too young to even consider picking because the sugars have not settled in. You're going to start to see some things change in that skin on that squash. And as we go through those changes, we'll be showing you, and I will show you how to pick those at the right ripeness, but also at the right moment, because you want something that, one, it's going to be great to eat now, but it's also something you want to be able to set on a shelf in your counter. So understand, when you grow winter squash, it's not like summer squash where you really kind of need to use it, you know, within a week or two after it's picked, because it's going to start wilting and doing some weird stuff. Winter squash, on the other hand, it will keep for months if you keep it in the right area and you trim it off right. And we're going to show you how to do all of that as we get to that time for that harvest, guys. And we're just right now really focusing on getting those gardens ready for spring. We've been moving that little hutch box out there. We showed you some of the other videos. It's got chickens in it. They're kicking up, eating the weeds, but also getting all the seeds out. That's why it's important to use chickens when you're doing that. If you've been dealing with a lot of gardens and stuff, if you can fence the whole garden in and cover it with a bird net to keep hawks and stuff out and your chickens from flying out, that's even better. But I don't really feel like expending that kind of an expense in it. So I want to show you that even with minimal expenses, just moving this box around, it's going to fertilize, it's going to get rid of those weed seeds, they're going to dig up them roots and all that kind of stuff. And then as you move it, you don't want to move them back over to it because you want it to rest for, you know, a couple months before that spring planting comes in. Now, what we're actually looking for out here is right around the end of March. So last year I planted right around the end of March, and we ended up getting a frost right there toward the end of March, and it killed the entire garden out, which was really depressing, but that does happen sometimes. And even though we typically don't get down into the 30s this time of year here, we're looking at it on Sunday. So those plants will have to be covered up to make sure that they do not get killed. Where the winter squash will be fine, it will kill that summer squash. It doesn't matter how many squash you have on a vine or how big your plant is, that frost, it'll be done. And then you have to start back square one. And you really don't even need to try to start back once that plant gets killed by frost, because if it's frosting and it's killed one, it's just going to continue to do it. So if you're not keeping on top of those gardens, you're going to have issues. But that's why it's important that you start doing these projects now, so that you learn as you go, because you don't want to be in a situation where you're running out of food, you're down your last few seeds, and you start planting it and you're eating it as soon as you can get it out of the garden, but you're not allowing anything to fully ripen out to have seeds for planting for, you know, the fall or even the next spring. So it's real important that you make sure that, you know, as a prepper, that you have a prepper's mindset, because you don't want to just be prepping food back. You want to be prepping a sustainable lifestyle. And that's what I'll try to teach you out on this channel, guys. But everyone have a wonderful week. We're going to hop off here.